Don't forget that today's show is brought to you by Speed Wheels. Find us at www.bondspeedwheelswithans.com or on Facebook at Speed Wheels. Remember, our wheels are made in America right here in Anaheim, California, and every wheel is custom built to order. Our forged billet wheels are built street tough. Speed Wheels. So welcome to another edition of Street Rod and Custom Radio, where we bring you the parts, the people, and the stories behind our automotive hobby. It's right here where we talk about hot rods, rat rods, street rods, race cars, muscle cars. If it's got wheels, you know we're going to talk about it. If it goes fast, for sure we're going to talk about it. I'm your host, Brad Fanshaw, and this week we're coming to you live from Lincoln, Nebraska, with Speedway Motors. And I'm going to tell you a little bit. Some of you already know that my history before I was partners with Boyd Coddington and was building hot rods out in California, that I was a Midwestern guy. And I came from Omaha, Nebraska. I went to high school and college back here, and all the speed shops that were back here and all of these, cruising and the street racing and the drag racing and the dirt track racing, everything that went on back here, we all would kind of come to this one location in Lincoln, Nebraska. I would roll in with my friends, and we would kind of oogle and ogle at all the cool things. And I got to tell you, there was one motor that used to always catch my attention, and it was in this shop that was right here in Lincoln. It was an all-polished ZL1 big block motor. And you know what? I've come back to the place to find that motor and to find the man who created everything and the reason that motor was sitting there. I'm at Speedway Motors in Lincoln, Nebraska, and my guest this week is Speedy Bill Smith, the founder and the man who's created this empire. And we're not only at where Speedway Motors is headquartered, we're in their museum, and it is spectacular. Bill, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Fun to be here.
I'm glad that you are here. It's such a great thing to get you out and have you come out to the museum today so that we could talk about how Speedway Motors came to be, your career in racing and sponsoring cars, and it's
building cars.
Building cars. I mean, but you sponsored and built, didn't you?
Sponsored a few, but built 90% of them.
Great. That's, you know what?
Hands-on.
And that's what's great, and that's what gave you kind of the, your whole catalog empire. It was because you had that knowledge and you had that base from doing it yourself, right?
Well, to understand a book, whether it's the Bible or whatever you have your interest in life, you better know everything from the front cover to the back cover.
And you know it page by page, don't you?
World according to Bill.
So, I mean, let's just jump right into it. I mean, Speedway Motors today produces a massive catalog of parts for the hardcore builder, the hardcore racer, everything that they might need. But it really started with you jumping on a motorcycle and doing some racing back in the 40s, didn't it?
Well, I was young, and we all go through hatching and dying. There's in the period in between. Everything that's living does that. The tree in your front yard, or the Easter Bunny, or whoever it is. So I had a lot of interest from the time I was 14. I was exposed by a gentleman that lived a couple blocks from me in collecting junk, and he had collected a 1917 Model T pickup truck. And so I was making $0.25 an hour if I would trade him and take it out and trade rather than money. If I took it out in money, it was 15 cents. So I got my first Model T Ford by working for him, $0.25 an hour, and it was $17.50. You couldn't drive in Nebraska until you were 16, but you could sneak around the back roads. So I learned to drive the Model T. I learned to keep it running. I learned to that it had water in the radiator, and when it got cold, you better put some alcohol in it so that it didn't freeze, and learned all the things that you need to know about driving an automobile.
So you got the baseline and got all the tricks of the trade, learned all the things, and cars weren't as complicated back then, were they?
To some extent, no, but to many, far more complicated. Because a Model T has 3 pedals on the floor.
The operational end of it, yeah. And
a Model T has a very quick steering. I tried to teach my cousin how to drive my Model T. We ended up on its side in the ditch.
Like a lot of Model Ts did on their side in the ditch, didn't they? And we're going to have more with Speedy Bill Smith right here at Speedway Motors when we come back to Street Rod and Custom Radio, so don't go away. We're back. You're listening to Street Rod and Custom Radio. I'm your host, Brad Fanshaw, and don't forget, you can find me on Facebook at Bondspeed Brad Fanshaw, and you can find one of our sponsors who helped bring this show today, Barrett-Jackson, the world's greatest collector car auctions. Visit them at barrett-jackson.com. We're here in Lincoln, Nebraska today, and I am at Speedway Motors, and I'm with the legendary Speedy Bill Smith, the man who has brought this sport to another level through his love and his enthusiasm for not only racing, but for hot rods and for the whole automotive hobby. And before I go any farther, I want to make sure that you know where to find out more about Speedway Motors. You can find them at speedwaymotors.com. So go there, check out their website. But when we left, Bill, we were talking about, kind of getting right down to the roots of things, the 40s, and you were just getting into it. You were learning the basics and learning how to maintain your car. But it seems like your enthusiasm for the automobile and for racing was about as fast as your cars were on the track, because you jumped right into it. And one of the things that I read was that you stated that your enthusiasm, I want to make sure I get this right because I don't want to offend you, but that your enthusiasm for racing maybe wasn't as good as your skill level, your skill level wasn't as good as your enthusiasm. So early on you realized that maybe building the cars and hiring out some drivers was a better thought?
Well, I was doing some things that didn't make my tummy feel good. I was an only child, and I had a tough love mother that lived to be 99, so we always enjoyed each other tremendously. And I was telling her that I wasn't going racing when I took my motorcycle to the county fairs around on Sunday afternoon, that I was there to view. I was lying to her, and it didn't make me feel good. So I was pretty good at motorcycle racing, but then when I tried roaring roadsters, and we killed 2 people at one time in Council Bluffs, Iowa, decapitated them.
Wow.
I thought maybe I had better, because I had busted the car up a couple of times when the roadsters first started in Hastings, Nebraska, before the 40s. No, it was in the 40s, late 40s. But I could spend more effort building the car and making the car go faster and stay together. And if it was a 10-lap race, we finished it. If it was a 20-lap race, we finished it. A lot of fallout in the early days because of different knowledges and so forth. So you just honed your interest, and you didn't say, well, I'm going to go play golf. I should be changing the bearings in that flathead Ford motor or something like that. So you have to stay pointed, I guess, is what, for lack of a better word, with all your enthusiasms. And how long you stay pointed at that could be a week, could be a month, but it's been 62 years for myself.
So you basically took your enthusiasm and you focused it in the direction of building those cars and and being successful in that area so that you didn't have to go lie to Mom, right?
I didn't want to lie to Mom, and I'm a competitor. I was a lover, not a fighter, so I couldn't punch the guy if we were arguing. So I had to do it in a different venue.
Well, let me ask you this. Now, when I first moved to Omaha, there were still some remnants across the river over in Council Bluffs, and when you brought this up, it kind of brought it up in the back of my head, of an old racetrack right there on the river. Was that called Playland Raceway?
Playland Park.
Yeah, and the remnants of that were still there, long gone now. But so that would have been one of the places where you raced.
Yeah, one of my good old drivers, Tiny Lund, got married at Playland Park in front of the grandstand.
Really?
Where the people came to watch the race, not a marriage. Now, they don't do things like that too much anymore, but a lot of crazy things and explaining times to people are very tough. We didn't have interstates. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have television. All of these things that bring awareness to you or the public, it makes it hard to explain.
Well, let's try a little bit of that. Like, for instance, when we come back, I want to talk about what it was like. I mean, what kind of an atmosphere you built these cars in, and because you brought up a really good point. Now today, these teams have these beautiful shops, and even a lot of the independent drivers have, these teams have these incredible shops and facilities. And you guys really had some basics, which you've got represented here in the museum upstairs. I remember seeing some things there. And when we come back on Street Rod and Custom Radio, we'll talk more with Bill from Speedway Motors right here in Lincoln, Nebraska. We're back. You're listening to Street Rod and Custom Radio. I'm your host, Brad Fanshaw. My co-host, Pete Shapur, is from SoCal Speed Shop, is not here because we're on location in Lincoln, Nebraska at Speedway Motors, and I'm talking with Speedy Bill Smith himself right here today on the show. And don't forget, today's show is brought to you by Craftsman, America's most trusted tool brand. It's trust in your hands. When we went away, we were just kind of hitting on Bill. We were talking about, we're bringing up through the years, and you brought something up about how racing back in the 40s and the 50s, there was the danger element to it, of course, which there's always a danger element, but it was pretty basic back then. Not a lot of safety equipment. And I know that one of the things that you've always been an advocate for is safety. And was that brought on because of your experiences in the early years and seeing some of the injury and death?
Well, people had a different mindset then, and lots of my drivers, I had, as I mentioned before, I think 97 over that short 40-year career of racing, hands-on. And as I would go to Knoxville, Iowa every Saturday night to run super modified sprint cars, things like that, I'd probably be taking my best buddy who was going to drive the car that night, and I was going to keep it running and change the tires and do everything that you had to do, plus drive the tow rig and keep the trailer.
You were the pit crew.
I was it. And it seemed like it was like taking somebody to the guillotine, in that mom was the word.
Yeah.
There was no conversation, possibly relating to like when you went to grandma's funeral. You realized that death was around.
What was it? Almost kind of like, let's not talk about it because that could jinx us?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, yeah.
And I had one driver that, if I would ever had a brother, Lloyd Beckman was his name, fantastic eye control, quick. He could touch the tip of his toe and the tip of his nose in his prime, and you couldn't see his hand move. People say that that's impossible. Well, you've seen fighters do the same thing. Mm-hmm. We don't all have those elements. as we come out of the egg.
He had his natural talents.
Natural talents, and he honed those. And at one time, if he would have had more desire and less fear and things like that, he could have gone to the top of Indianapolis or any higher level than we were running at the time. So, and you recognize these things when you have a hands-on situation. They may have focus, you can see it in their eyes. And it's...
So that had to be tough, I mean, because like you said, these were personal friends of yours. You built cars, and so you had the responsibility that you were the one building the cars. Now you're taking them to the track, so it was a lot on your shoulders thinking, you know, if something goes wrong with the car, it's on me. If something goes wrong out on the track, I'm the one who brought them here. So, but you kept motivated, you kept pushing, you kept going. Was the thrill of the competition and the challenge of the sport? Is that what it was? Lots
of challenges, lots of thrills, and you can't put your finger on your passions.
Yeah.
You can blend in with people who have the same passion at that point in time, but I don't think you can actually, and everybody's built different, you know. We all come out of the egg the same, but there's a lot of difference in personalities and desires, background, education. I happen to be a school teacher by education, and so I learned that, you know, there was people who had 70 IQs and some had 160.
Well, you and I visited earlier before the interview, and we were both very good friends with Little John Butera.
Sure.
And there's a really good example of the people that only saw what he achieved as a machinist and a mechanical engineer, and, you know, really a genius in our view because of the things that he innovated. But when you knew him as a friend and as on that interpersonal level, we both know that he had so much brain power, but maybe he didn't put a lot of that to being a personable guy, you know? But that's kind of what makes us laugh right there about him, you know?
Yeah.
And it's those type of things. And racing is full of personalities. It's always been full of personalities. Guys with gusto, guys with that drive, or that, as you said, that passion that you can't put a finger on it. And I think that is what has taken you to building this company and this museum and everything like that. And that's what I want to talk about when we come back. This is Brad Fanshaw. You're listening to Street Rod and Custom Radio, and I'm here today at Speedway Motors with Speedy Bill Smith. And we've got more, so don't you dare go away. And we're back. You're listening to Street Rod and Custom Radio. I'm Brad Fanshaw, your host. And as I said, my partner on the mic from SoCal Speed Shop, that's Pete Shaporis. He's back in California today because I'm here at Speedway Motors in Lincoln, Nebraska, my old stomping grounds, and I'm getting an exclusive interview with Speedy Bill Smith. And we're talking about the early years. We're going to bring you all the way up. We're going to give you the story today. And we're kind of getting through the racing years, talking about that. If you didn't listen, remember, you can always tune in on iTunes and catch that webcast later on. But, Bill, we were talking about it's the drive and the determination, but you took all of that from racing and you learned, and would you say that's what you applied to your business? Because you were one of the very first speed shops in the Midwest when you opened.
Well, I was one of the very first speed shops in the world.
In the world, okay.
To straighten it out.
No, hey, you know what? We're here to set the record straight. You know, if there's anything floating around out there that you want to set the record straight, now's the time to do it.
Well, there were a few others, but, in the middle of the U.S. where most of the people think that the pigs and cows come from, the perception is always everything. It was home always. I went to all the grade schools here, I went to all the high schools here, I went to all the colleges here, and it was always home. So I didn't trade the feeling for home for the feeling for the California effort or the Texas effort or Florida or wherever it might be. It moves around, you know.
You brought it to you.
I brought it to me. And that's easier said than done, like all things in life. But it became a challenge, naturally. And like I said before, I'm very competitive. So my competitive effort is in the business, in my racing career, in street rodding. Actually, in the early days, when I started in '52, we took our street cars that we raced on the street at night and drove to work in the daytime and et cetera, took them to the county fair tracks and raced them on Sunday afternoon, the same vehicle.
You're street driver during the week, you're racer, and then your weekend race car.
Yeah, and how do you explain those things to people?
Well, I can say when I lived in Nebraska, there was a little of that too. I used to have to explain to my parents why there was, 9-inch wrinkle walls on my Chevelle on Sunday morning, and, that was just for looks.
But that all transpired, and then, I always equate it to going to see your doctor. In the old days, you went to your doctor. If your toe was sore or if your nose was sore, he fixed your toe and your nose. He didn't send you to his pal, a specialist. So as these hobbies, interests, whatever you called them at the time, as they grew, then you had the specialist that, this guy does circle track cars. This guy builds custom cars. This guy builds engines. He didn't know anything about the car that it's going in, but he'll build you the most horsepower that you ever wanted in your whole life. And this is the way this all grew. Probably like having a rose garden. And you started out with one plant, and you loved roses. But as you saw other roses, well, here were pink ones. I thought they were all red.
I gotcha.
Here, all different kinds. And some of these things are, like I said 3 or 4 times there, I hate to be repeating myself, but they are very hard to explain. Well, but the growth and the interest came with people who were doing things, and then people who respected the person that was doing them. Not everybody respects who's the president today. He's lucky if he gets 25% of the voting.
Right.
And so, but you have to remain humble. You can't be cocky unless you're John Butera.
He was born that way. He came out of the egg that way. So, well, let me reel this in a little bit. I think what you're trying to say is that, let's put it in car guy terms, is that there's guys that only like Mopars, or they only like Chevys, or they only like Fords. And you had a love, you kept looking out there and going, I like sprint cars. Hey, I like stock cars. Hey, I like street rods. I like motorcycles. And you gathered knowledge and acquired interest, and is that how you built your company? Because you gathered all that knowledge and interest and a broad interest, not a real focused on one area. You didn't just go for machined parts. You went for trying to give something to all the different type of auto enthusiasts with your company?
That is true. Early on, they're in, we'll say, building engines for the racer that I was building. I built every piece of it. The cars you see here in the museum, they weren't bought over here and bought over here and bought over here. and I bolted them together. I built all those pieces.
Okay.
And that's a hard thing to explain in today's society. But those motorcycles in the 30s and the 20s from England had aluminum rocker arms on them. Well, who got the idea for aluminum rocker arms? Somebody who saw that and then transposed that item into putting them on a car. And there's so many things like that. I happen to be privy to go to the Ford Museum's clean-out auction.
Well, hold that thought, because we got to go to another commercial break. We got to pay for this thing. So, hey, this is Brad Fanshaw. I'm with Speedy Bill Smith here at Speedway Motors in Lincoln, Nebraska. Don't go away, because you heard it. It's right on the tip of his tongue. He's going to be talking about the Ford auction that he went to when we come back right here on Street Rod and Custom Radio. We're back. Thanks for sticking around. You're listening to Street Rod and Custom Radio. I'm your host, Brad Fanshaw, and I am here today. As I've told you before, we're in the heartland of America, Lincoln, Nebraska. I'm with Speedy Bill Smith, and he earned that name. We were talking about that earlier in the show because, you know what? Names like that are earned. They're not just handed out as you roll into the Nebraska line here. It's something that he's done through years of racing and innovation, and we are here at the museum, and you're going to see some photos of this on our website and on my Facebook page at Bondspeed Brad Fanshaw, and we're also going to have a bonus video for this episode. But when we were going away, we were talking about what built this company, what it takes to do that, and he was just about ready to tell us about a Ford auction that he attended. So, Bill, I'm going to go right back into it so you can tell us. I'm waiting to hear this one.
Well, the Ford Museum in Detroit had decided they had too much junk that had come from the Ford Motor Company.
Sounds like a sale I'd like to be at.
Yeah, well, opportunities seized and
Yes.
Opportunities missed. Most of the boys at the bar talk about other things that
Yes.
seized and missed. But I was at that 3-day sale and drove home with my wife, Joyce, in a 1.5 ton box truck that we had driven in anticipation of buying a few things, loaded so heavily that I drove 35 miles an hour from Detroit, Michigan to Lincoln, Nebraska.
That was a long trip back, wasn't it?
Long trip. But if I would have had a little accident or tire blew out or something, all of those engines and things that I had bought at the auction would have come forward and crushed me and my wife Joyce against the dash, and
That wouldn't have been good.
You wouldn't have been able to
We wouldn't have had this museum or anything.
So there was always challenges every day, but at the Ford Museum, you saw evidence of how they learned some of their things. And they had English cars there. They had French cars there. And you call it reverse engineering sometimes.
Yes.
But it gives the team or the crew or all the people that are working on projects, it triggers their interest.
It gives them something where they can, not everybody has one idea.
Right,
And
right.
so it's a melding of ideas, but they extrapolate it from pulling a car apart, is what you're saying.
Yeah, and you can't, some people get it from a drawing, an engineering drawing. Some people get it from a model. Mm-hmm. Some people get it from a dream. There's ideas come from many different ways.
Well, speaking of dreams, and because we're going to run out of show because you've done so much that we can't fit it into this short, so.
61 years, you can't fit in?
No, not and do it justice, okay? We could do it really fast, but that wouldn't be any good. Let's talk about the company, because when you started out, you started out in a speed shop on O Street. Then you grew and you started doing the mail order, and I mean, when I look over there today, I mean, how many square feet is that building over there, your warehouse?
The configuration is 500,000, but in a warehouse that holds the type product that we have in there, it is over twice that because of the way that one of my sons happens to be a engineer for that. Mm-hmm. And so it has got a lot of ideas, and I think every day we sharpen the pencil and make it better. That's just the way the company has always worked.
And that's what makes a good company. You can't say, okay, here it is, now I'm going to go to my office and, play on the web or something like that. You got to keep doing that. But one of the things that I notice, that I've always noticed about the Speedway Motors catalog is there are, your competitors out there, but what I've noticed about yours is it seems to be really geared towards more of the racer, the fabricator, the guy who's hands-on, because there's a lot of parts and pieces that aren't necessarily just you open the box and bolt it on, but it's parts and pieces that can help me fabricate something else. Was that something that you really focused on?
In the early days, focused on those things because they weren't available. Mm-hmm. Only through one or two shops all across the country. If you lived in Pennsylvania, if you lived in Portland, Oregon, or you weren't able to go and find that, period. You would spend a day or two or a week to find a clevis. There was 5/8 with a 3/8 slot with a 3/8 bolt hole through it. And, many of the parts at the time were war surplus from World War II that were developed then. So, I manufactured, we built 6,000 parts of our own right in this building.
6,000 parts. That's incredible.
Different parts.
And with this resurgence now of what everyone calls more traditional street rods, rather than the super high tech, but going back to a little bit more traditional, do you think that has driven a lot of people to the Speedway Motors catalog?
Well, it progressed. In my early days, if I could get my car ready to go to the gas station on Friday night and display it to my buddies, I only had to go 6 blocks. And it didn't need to handle and stop and do all the things that street rods have to do today. A street rod today has to drive and handle and work better than their brand new car that they bought at 2014 for Mama to drive. Those cars have got to almost relate.
Well, because as
not
you said,
in the look, but in the way they.
And that's a really good point, because you brought it up earlier in the show that the car you used to drive every day was your race car on the weekend. Now these guys drive something that's all cushy and soft during the week, and then they want to jump in that and have it cushy and soft on the weekend. Right. Hey, we're talking to Speedy Bill Smith right here at Speedway Motors. I'm Brad Fanshaw. Don't go away, because we've got more right here as we wrap it up on this week's edition of Street Rod and Custom Radio. Thanks for sticking around. This is Street Rod and Custom Radio. I'm your host, Brad Fanshaw, and we are wrapping up a great show and a fantastic interview with Speedy Bill Smith right here at Speedway Motors. Don't forget, you can find them on that interweb thing at www.speedwaymotors.com. And we're filming today here at the museum. And this is the Museum of American Speed. And you can find them on the web at museumofamericanspeed.com. And one of the things that's so unique about this museum that you've built here is that when people go to your website, they're going to be able to find out that this is open to the public. It's guided tours, and it's a 2.5-hour tour. And there's a lot to see here. I mean, trust me, folks, when you come here, it's well worth your 2.5 hours, because when I walk in that door, the first thing that attracted me was, I have a love of Miller board track cars, because when you talk about innovation and things there, those Miller cars were it, and you've got that whole diorama up there. And when you put this museum together, when you said, okay, I've got all these cars sitting around and all your pedal cars, because you have your love of pedal cars, How do you just even start putting something like this down on paper that you're gonna build it? Because it has an atmosphere. It's not just lines of cars.
That is always challenging. This museum, the Museum of American Speed, has the largest collection of racing and exotic engines in the world. And that's not what I say, that's what all of the media who have come from France and Australia and all around the world, that's what they say as they tell their readership.
As their eyes pop out
right.
when they see them, right?
Yeah. And there's well over 600 exotic engines on display, many of them one-offs, because the dream didn't become reality only first time. Some of them never finished. And this is through a period of over 100 years, not just the last 10 or 20 or et cetera, because, you know, the Model T Ford came into existence in about 1907, and a lot of the innovations in the automotive world were just after the turn of the century in other companies. Many of them couldn't stand the depression of the 30s, so Packard and some of the got very weak and had to go out of business later on. And all of these things that, and you know, Studebaker was probably, in my mind, as successful at Indianapolis, but never won with their cars or their engines, but had an awful lot of second places. And in life, nobody talked about who ran second.
Right.
If you're a racer, second is the first loser.
There you go.
And that's, you know, in absorbing all this as a young man and going through the aging process and so forth, you learn a lot from doing, touching, etc.
And building that company that's sitting there across the street with that massive facility and all the products, that's also something that is ever growing, ever changing. Now you've got multiple catalogs that reach out to the different racer groups, different enthusiast groups. And I'll be the first to admit, I thought it was, you know, hardcore racing and street rods and things like that. But nowadays you even reach out to the guys who are the muscle cars, because let's face it, the 69 Camaro is kind of like the 32 Ford of today, and for the guys that grew up kind of in my age group.
Well, all ages change, all interests change. But if you have the world of wheels in your head as a young person, it will probably stay there for a long time.
Well, I would say that the automotive world, the passion for cars and racing and collecting have kept you young at heart and kept you moving along, because I see them every year, and you're still got a grin on your face when you're rolling around talking to the people and seeing what's new there. And would you say that is something that's kept you very motivated? Well,
individuals keep you motivated. Because you can learn from everybody, good, bad, or indifferent. You know, I've been privileged to know everybody in the performance business.
They told me they knew you.
No, I know them. You know, the Mickey Thompsons, the Shelbys, you know, Linda Vons, everybody in the performance business, because in the 50s and 60s, it was a very small nucleus of people all across the United States. It wasn't a big group like the SEMA show is today.
Right. It was a select group of people, and I'm sorry to say we're out of time.
I'm sorry.
No, I mean, your stories keep going. I want to hear more. We will. I'll take you up on that. Thanks, everybody. We've been here at Speedway Motors in Lincoln, Nebraska. Bill, thanks so much for taking the time today and being on Street Rod and Custom Radio.
Well, it's fun to do, or I wouldn't have done it.
Thank you so much. Don't go away, because next week we'll have even more.